Today we're going to do a Reddit reaction video reacting to a post that challenges one of the most common pieces of personal finance advice, and that is how big your emergency fund should really be, especially if you're a high income earner. If you're a dentist, physician, veterinarian, therapist, or any of those really high income professionals with lots of student loan debt, you've probably heard the 6 to 12 months of emergency expenses or having that on hand. That rule has been thrown around a lot, but does that rule actually make sense for someone in your specific situation? Let's talk about it. I'm Meagan McGuire, certified financial planner with SLP Wealth, and I'm excited to dive in. The Reddit post we're looking at today comes from someone who says the traditional emergency fund advice feels really overly conservative, especially for high income earners with established portfolios. They've been working for nearly 20 years, have dual incomes, access to liquidity through things like a HELOC and lines of credit, and argue that keeping a large chunk of cash in savings is just opportunity cost. Their view: cash sitting idle is money that is not compounding or growing, and after living through 2008 and 2020, they've never regretted keeping most of their wealth invested rather than in cash. So let's break it down. First, I will say I do love that they recognize that personal finance is personal. That is true across the board. But as a financial planner, I want to unpack how this logic might or might not work for people like you. So let's talk about the basics. An emergency fund exists to cover unexpected, high-impact situations, things like a job loss, a medical emergency, or a large, sudden expense. The rule of thumb, I've always said 3 to 6 months of living expenses, is really meant to cover those scenarios without having to sell investments at a bad time or rack up debt. A HELOC, it's a line of credit against that asset. So in my mind, it is debt. And selling out of investments at a bad time can completely happen at any point in time. You don't want to be pulling out of your investment accounts, your accessible investment accounts, when the market is down, because then we're taking a hit and we're feeling the loss, but we have no other choice because that's where our money is. Now, if you're a high income earner, let's say a physician earning $250,000, or maybe a dentist, you're making $300,000, the math does look different. Your expenses are often, I would say, higher, usually, right? You might have a mortgage, you still have student loans, you have childcare potentially, you have practice overhead if you're a practice owner, and lifestyle costs that add up pretty quickly because keeping up with the Joneses is a real thing. So while you're technically a high income earner and you could replace income faster or access credit lines, the risk tolerance and cash flow volatility you may face may be different than this Reddit poster specifically. So for example, a veterinarian running their own practice might have 30 to 40,000 in monthly expenses between personal and business obligations. A 3-month emergency fund means holding close to about $100,000 in accessible cash, and that feels like a lot. But if your clinic suddenly faces a downturn, or you can't work due to an illness and your disability insurance doesn't kick in for 3 months, that cash buys you time, and it also buys you a lot of peace of mind. That's the other part of this. Or take a therapist in private practice with variable client flow, income coming in from clients. They might not need 6 months in cash, but having 2 to 3 months of expenses readily available can help buffer against cancellations or a really weird slow season. Now, I will say though, the Reddit poster brings up a valid point when they're talking about opportunity cost. And yes, when savings rates are near zero, if it's in a high yield savings account, hopefully it's not close to zero. Hopefully it's like 3-4%. But anyways, when savings rates are low, the difference between holding cash and being fully invested in the market is pretty substantial. But in today's environment, high yield savings accounts are paying for 3-4%, and that's not nothing, right? It's not nothing. The question is, what are you optimizing for? If your priority is maximizing your long-term returns, you'll likely keep less cash and more in investments. If your priority, though, is stability, flexibility, peace of mind, then a larger cash buffer could make a lot of sense. Emergency funds are not supposed to be income generating growth vehicles. It's supposed to be that security blanket in the background for you. Another factor I will say is job stability. This Reddit poster mentioned being part of a dual income household, both with access to severance and unemployment benefits. That is great, but for many professionals I work with, especially those early in their careers or running a business, job security is not guaranteed. Sometimes severances are non-existent, especially if you're at a small practice or you're a business owner. Physicians in private practices, for example, they can't count on severance. Dentists who own their clinics can't fire themselves and collect unemployment insurance or unemployment benefits. So relying on a HELOC or a loan for liquidity, could you do that? Yeah, but it gets risky if markets tighten, credit terms change, maybe your credit is not great, maybe interest rates aren't that great. And again, we're relying on debt for our emergency versus something that's a lot more secure and easy. So here's how I would think about it. Start with your fixed monthly expenses. What does that actually add up to, what's the cost of living to run your life or to run your business for a month? Next step would be to decide what your comfort level is. What's your comfort zone? If you're a dual income household with very stable W-2 jobs, 3 months of emergency funds on hand might be plenty. Great. If you're self-employed though, and you have variable income and you're in a practice that's just or you're in a business that's impacted severely by like what's going on in the economy, then you might want to lean closer to 6 months, maybe even more, to give yourself some peace of mind. Think in tiers of liquidity here. Some in cash, some in short-term bonds, maybe. CDs, they did have a place at some point. I don't know if that's what we want to consider now, but you can think of those as tiers. Maybe access to credit if needed. But if the right combination of those things gives you flexibility without having to worry about, 6 figures sitting stagnant, then fine. You can tier out how you want to set up your emergency reserves. At the end of the day, there is no single right answer. The traditional rules of thumb are meant to be guardrails, I would say, not commandments. And what matters most is that your emergency fund matches your risk profile, your lifestyle, your realities, your career realities. If you're a higher income earner with significant student loan debt and you want to strike the right balance between liquidity and growth, that is exactly where thoughtful financial planning comes in. So if this resonated with you or made you rethink your own setup with your emergency savings, subscribe to the channel and check out the link below to learn more about what it's like to work with a financial planner at SLP Wealth. We'll help you build a plan that makes sense for your goals and give you some peace of mind. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.